Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on my YouTube channel Anton GF. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez and as usual I'm coming to you over YouTube from the city of Jackson in the state of Tennessee in the United States of America. And today I want to record a video about Tintin in English, and this is actually an idea that was suggested to me by a friend to go along with a video that I recorded a few months ago called Why I Enjoy Reading Tintin, or something like that. Well, the idea now is to give a brief overview of the complete Adventures of Tintin, going book by book and giving some tidbits of information about each one of the adventures. For those of you who may be acquainted with Tintin because you've watched the Steven Spielberg movie that was made a few years ago, or maybe you've read a few of the books but you want to know what I think about each one of the volumes in the series, since I have read them many times. And well, I'm not going to be giving you an overview of the life and work of Hergé, the creator of Tintin. We could leave that maybe for a different video. What I'm going to be doing today is just go book by book, and I'm going to be giving you some tidbits of information about each one of the volumes. And I'm going to be doing actually a two-part video. The first part is the one that you're watching right now, which will include half, more or less, of the canonical Tintin books, and then we will have a second video in which we will talk about the other half of the series. Before we start, though, I would like to tell you that it's fairly easy to find the Tintin books in English in different formats and different editions, some of them with a bigger size than others. And one way in which, you know, it's fairly easy and relatively inexpensive to acquire the whole series is to buy this edition, which comes in 7 volumes. You see that there, from volume 1 through 7, English translation of the Adventures of Tintin. The format is a little smaller than the regular size books, as you can see here, and it includes 3 different books in each one of the volumes. In this case, Tintin in America, Cigars of the Pharaoh, and the Blue Lotus. This is not a bad idea, and in fact it's fairly portable. As you can see, the edition is a lot smaller than the regular size books. Of course, you can also find those separately, so it's basically your choice. The problem with the 3 complete adventures in 1 volume edition of Tintin is that it actually does not include all the Tintin books. Some of them are missing. In fact, 3 of them, or well, 2 depending on what you think, are missing, because there's 3 per volume. There's 21 in all, and if you actually look through all the different titles that make up the Adventures of Tintin, there's 24 of the books in all. Now, 2 of those books don't appear in this collection because, well, because of their sensitive nature. The first one, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, is a clearly anti-communist book that was never redrawn by Hergé, was never colored. It was never published in color by Hergé, and for that reason it does not appear in this 7-volume collection. The second story that is not included in this collection is Tintin in the Congo, which is by far the most controversial Tintin adventure because of its colonialist undertones and what many people have deemed racist content, and also some animal rights activists have talked about and denounced the cruelty to animals that appears in that book. So those 2, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets and Tintin in the Congo, are not part of this 7-volume edition. And then there's Tintin and Alf Art, which is the last book in the series that Hergé never got around to finishing before he passed away in 1983. So it's an unfinished adventure that some people don't even consider part of the Tintin canon, but I do consider it, even though I will not be talking about it in this two-part series about the complete adventures of Tintin. So if you decide to go with this option, you should know that only 21 out of the 24 Tintin books are available in the series, but it's fairly easy, or at least not impossible, to find Tintin in the Land of the Soviets and Tintin in the Congo, as well as Tintin and Alpha Art separately. So that's another route that you could definitely go. Now we're going to go book by book, talking about the first half. We're going to be starting with Tintin in the Land of the Soviets in this video, and we're going to go all the way to read Rackham's Treasure, and then the rest of them will be left for another video that we will record in the future. Now, starting with the very first Tintin book that I have right here, not in English, although it is available in English. This is a Dutch translation of Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. I like to collect books of Tintin in different languages, some that I understand, like Dutch in this case, and some that I don't understand, as you will see later. So this book, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, takes us to the very beginning of the Tintin adventures, back in 1929, when Hergé had been working for the Belgian newspaper 20e siècle, or the 20th century, and he had been doing some drawings, and he had been working in the subscriptions department, and at some point the director of this newspaper, a Catholic priest by the name of Norbert Wallet, puts Hergé, a very young Hergé, in charge of a new supplement for the youth, for children, called Le Petit 20e, the Little 20th. This was a supplement for kids in which Hergé begins weekly the adventures of this new character that you can see here with his dog. That's Tintin right there, the early incarnation of Tintin, and the dog Snowy, or Milou in French. And the idea was to send Tintin, who was, as you can see there, a reporter of the Petit 20e, of the Little 20th, in this case to the USSR. And, well, Hergé does that, and does that at a time when, not just in Belgium, but all over Europe, there is this strong anti-communist sentiment that was prevalent in Belgium and other parts of Europe, of course, but also particularly at the 20th century. A newspaper, which was a Catholic, really conservative newspaper, and this is reflected in the book very clearly. Hergé has not really done a lot of research to create this story. At this point, everything was just a game for him. He didn't really think of this as a real way to make a living. He didn't think he was creating any kind of art, but he was creating or helping create a new medium. And so he is really experimenting here with the medium of comic books. Of course, the story is not extremely interesting, in the sense that the plot is quite erratic at some points, quite unbelievable in many others. Week after week, Hergé is not completely sure how he's going to continue the adventure, but one thing that he did was read a book called Moscou sans voile, or Moscow Without Veils, written by Joseph Douillet, who had been a diplomat in the USSR, a Belgian diplomat in the USSR, and of course that book exudes a clear anti-communist sentiment. And what Hergé has done, most of the research, if you want to call it that way, that he has done at this point to create this adventure of Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, is to read that book by Douillet. He hasn't really done a lot of research, and what he does most of the time, in some cases very clearly, is to transpose that book by Joseph Douillet onto the comic book format. So he has taken chunks from that book and he has basically illustrated them as part of the Tintin story. As you can see, if we open the book, it is in black and white. The drawings are still fairly pedestrian, but quite interesting, really. There's a lot of movement, a lot of action in this first adventure of Tintin that has been harshly criticized by many, but I think it's an important read because it gives us an idea of where Tintin is coming from. Of course, the Adventures of Tintin in the Land of the Soviets was extremely popular from the very beginning, and this made Hergé decide to continue with the series after Tintin comes back from communist Russia, from the USSR. He's going to send Tintin somewhere else. And his idea originally was to send Tintin to the United States, to North America, because he had this fascination with the United States. He had this fascination that came through watching westerns and gangster movies with the city of Chicago, with the far west, and that kind of thing. And he wanted to send Tintin to America, but the priest, Norbert Wallet, stepped in and urged Hergé to send Tintin not to America, but to the Congo. At the time, in the early 1930s, the Congo was one of the colonies that Belgium had, and the idea that Wallet had was to glorify this kind of idea of colonialism and maybe to draw people's interest to the Congo, and to have people invest money there and maybe move there to work. So the second Tintin book is this one right here that I have in a Polish translation. I don't understand or speak Polish, but as I said before, I like to collect Tintin books in different languages, and Tintin in the Congo is one that I have in French, for example. I have it in Spanish, I have it in English as well, but this is the Polish edition of Tintin in the Congo. And this is by far the most controversial of Tintin books. If you thought that maybe Tintin in the Land of the Soviets would be controversial, well, Tintin in the Congo became even more so because of its colonial content. A lot of people have criticized it for its racism, and I'm not going to say there is no racial component. Just look at the cover and you will see that it's impossible to deny that. But it comes more from the colonialist sentiment that was prevalent in Belgium at the time, and particularly at the 20e siècle. This book is, this adventure of Tintin is very much a product of its time, and as such we need to approach it. It is a document of an era that hopefully is long gone, but that's the way it was back in the 1930s. This is the idea that people in Belgium and in other parts of Europe as well had about the Congo and had about Africa. I have never been a proponent of censoring this book, but you know, it would be a good idea to read it in context with an introduction that explained the situation and why this book was written and how it was created and what the sentiment was that gave birth to a work like this. Once again, it is a very episodic adventure with lots of action. Unlike Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, Hergé did redraw and color this adventure, changing a few things that were deemed too controversial, too colonialist when he revisited the book. And there has been a movement to ban this book for many years and on many occasions, but I do believe that Tintin in the Congo should be seen as a product of its time and should be read within the context of 1930s Belgium at a time when Belgium owned these colonial possessions, which would gain their independence years later. Kind of like the most forbidden of Tintin books, but one that will give you an insight into what people at the time in Belgium and in Europe in general thought of Africa and how they saw the African people, in this case by means of Tintin's very clearly colonialist trek through the Belgian Congo. Now, Tintin in the Congo was even more popular than Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. It was also originally published in black and white, and then in the years later it was revisited and redrawn and colored by Hergé, and this is common to all the early Tintin adventures. There's a black and white edition which was serialized in the Little 20th and Le Petit 20e, and then it was published in book form, originally in black and white, and then redrawn and colored by Hergé, mostly in the 1940s. After Tintin came back from the Congo, finally Hergé got the chance to send Tintin to America. And you have the book right there. And as you can see from the cover itself, it is a highly idealized America. And this is the America of the Far West that Hergé was really drawn to. He had been, after all, a Boy Scout. And he shows an appreciation for Western and Western lore and Native American culture as well. Another thing that he had an appreciation for were gangster movies. And so this America that Tintin travels to is a mixture of the America of gangsters and organized crime, which Tintin defeats in this book, and also the America of the Far West and the Wild West and Native American culture, which Hergé really was interested in. And there are a couple of things of note about Tintin in America. One of them, the fact that Hergé actually speaks in favor of Native Americans and denounces their treatment at the hands of the American government in some of the pages of this book. And then also there is an appearance of an actual real-life character, Al Capone, the Chicago gangster, who is one of the few, if not the only one, of real-life characters that actually appear in the Adventures of Tintin. Some characters, especially some villains in the Adventures of Tintin, are based on real people, but in the case of Al Capone, he's a real-life character that appears in this book, Tintin in America, which consolidated the popularity of the character of Tintin in Le Petit 20e. By this point, the Tintin adventures were appearing in France as well as Belgium, and Hergé was becoming more and more popular. The adventures are still episodic. There isn't much of a plan for him, but that is soon going to change. Not yet, because the next adventure right there, you can see it, Cigars of the Pharaoh. That's one, as you've seen, you probably noticed that we have Tintin traveling to different places, and that's where he finds the adventures, because he travels to those places. The USSR, the Congo, America, North America, and then in this case Tintin is going to the Near East and will end up actually visiting the Far East as well. Now an extra thing that we find in Cigars of the Pharaoh is the introduction of certain elements that come from the time when Hergé is creating these stories. And in this case, that element is the element of smuggling, drug smuggling, in this case opium, which is the motor of the plot for Cigars of the Pharaoh and also for the next adventure, which is the Blue Lotus. It is a two-part adventure, although it's not clear that Hergé originally intended it to be a two-part adventure. What he was doing was, after sending Tintin to different parts of the world, he's sending Tintin to a part of the world that he hasn't visited yet, in this case the Near East and then the Far East. But this book marks the appearance of the detectives, the Thompsons, Thompson and Thompson, or Dupont et Dupont in French. Two detectives always dressed in black and wearing a black bowler hat that will at first pursue Tintin and become obstacles for Tintin, whom they always mistake for a criminal. But as time goes by, they actually will become friends of Tintin and an important part, a very comic part too, of the Tintin universe. Cigars of the Pharaoh also sees the first appearance of Rastapopulus, the arch nemesis of Tintin, villain to end all villains within the series. His first appearance is here as a film tycoon who also has several shady dealings in the background. Tintin keeps traveling from the Near East eastward to the Far East and ends up in the Blue Lotus, which you can see there. What a wonderful cover that is! The cover of the Blue Lotus, that black with that black dragon with the a red background, bright red background, and all of those Chinese characters and Chinese iconography. This is a very important book in the Tintin series. It is a high watermark, and it's a book that's going to change things around for the series and for Hergé and for the character of Tintin. And we will see how. It's not just a book that has a wonderful cover, but it's a book that comes about in many ways because Hergé at this time meets a man who will become his friend and who will become a very important influence for him, both personally and also artistically. I'm talking about a young Chinese artist, a young Chinese student in Belgium by the name of Chang Chongjian. The relationship between Chang and Hergé will make Hergé more aware of the fact that what he is creating is art. Also makes Hergé more interested in doing research, not just relying on stereotypes about the places that he's going to send Tintin to. And also makes Hergé more politically aware of certain things. At this point, there was a Japanese invasion of China going on, the Japanese-Chinese War, and in this book, Hergé takes the side of the Chinese and is using contemporary historical events to create a fictional work that artistically has the imprint of Chang, who will be, as I said before, one of the most important influences on Hergé as an artist. Hergé realizes now that what he's doing is not just something to pass away the time or to entertain kids, but he can include a deeper layer that will appeal to adults as well as kids. And with the Blue Lotus, Hergé becomes more interested not only in perfecting the artistic component of the Adventures of Tintin, but also in doing more research towards gaining a better understanding of the places where he is sending his hero and his dog. He also tries to dispel myths that were maintained in the Western world about China, and he even includes a character in the Blue Lotus, which is a kid by the name of Chang, which represents, of course, his friend and important influence, Chang Chon Jan. Things will not be the same after the Blue Lotus for Hergé or for the series of the Adventures of Tintin, and if Hergé had sent Tintin to North America, now comes the time to send him to South America, and that's the book that you see right there, the adventure entitled The Broken Ear. In this case, Hergé keeps on perfecting more and more his artistic component to the Tintin books, but he also starts working harder on creating a scenario, on creating a plot that is much more interesting or much more complex than the episodic plots that he had been favoring until then. In this case, everything has to do with an old Native American fetish, a little statuette made of wood that includes a certain kind or contains a certain kind of treasure inside. And in this book, Tintin actually, the adventure lures Tintin into the trip to South America. He is not traveling to South America to find the adventure there, but the adventure actually ends up leading him there. And this is going to become the most common situation from now on in the Tintin series. The Broken Ear is interesting also because of the creation of the Republic of San Theodoros, which is a fictional country, and Hergé very often creates fictional countries in which to set some of the Tintin stories, and this gives Hergé the chance to dramatize certain contents in a land that is fictional but that mirrors certain real countries. In this case, many of the South American and Central American republics that actually effectively exist. It's also the first appearance here in The Broken Ear of General Alcazar, who is the general in charge, who is the ruler, fairly dictatorial ruler of the Republic of San Theodoros, and he is going to be important not only in this story but also in a few more that would be to come several decades later. Very interesting, The Broken Ear, to see when we compare The Broken Ear with the earlier Tintin adventures. We can see that Hergé is really refining his craft little by little, both artistically and also in anything that's related to the plot. One of the most interesting of all the Tintin adventures, one of my favorites as well, is the one that comes next, The Black Island. And this is Tintin's trek through the British Isles. He goes to England, he goes to Scotland, and in the process, Hergé is creating one of the most interesting adventures, and one that I always recommend that people begin reading, especially if they would like to present the adventures of Tintin to their younger kids, because this is action-packed. It's a story that in this case doesn't have to do with drug smuggling, it doesn't have to do with any sort of statuette or hidden treasure or anything like that. It has a lot more to do with forgers, with money forgery, and this is an activity that takes place in England and also in Scotland, on that Black Island of the title. And it has a lot to do with the world of the thriller. Movies by Alfred Hitchcock, for example, like The 39 Steps. There's a lot of that kind of iconography. There's a lot of that kind of content, a lot of that kind of atmosphere in this story. And of course, the story still has its episodic elements. You can't necessarily get away from that. But this story in the Black Island is a lot more complex than the earlier ones. Hergé also began to do some more serious research, in the sense that he actually did travel to England to take some, to draw some sketches, to take some pictures. And so there's a certain kind of realism to the Black Island that did not come before in the Adventures of Tintin. This is also a story that has several different versions, because the English publisher of the Adventures of Tintin asked Hergé in the 1960s to modernize the artistic part of it, because the image of the British Isles that he was given was thought to be a little bit old-fashioned and anachronistic by the 1960s. So this version that we all know, and the one that you'll encounter most commonly, is actually the final version of the Black Island, redrawn by Hergé and with more modern elements. It also marks the appearance of Dr. Müller, that villain with a German last name that will be recurrent in other Tintin adventures and who appears here for the first time. The iconography of the Black Island is really attractive. It's a really well done story, both from the point of view of the plot and also from the point of view of the art that you will find on all the pages, basically, of this story. Just look at that cover again. It's a really pretty cover. Gives you an idea of the mystery. This is a mystery. Tintin is drawn into a certain kind of mystery that he needs to solve, and this is what we will find again from now on in the series. We're getting closer to difficult years for Hergé, by the way, because we're nearing the years of World War II, and the years of World War II would be very difficult for Hergé for some reasons that we will touch upon briefly later on. King Audiker's Scepter is another story that is set in a fictional country created by Hergé, in this case the Kingdom of Sildavia, with their arch enemies neighboring Borduria. And what Hergé is doing here is dramatizing the Anschluss. He is basically taking contemporary historical events again and fashioning them into a story, in this case set not in a real country, but in a fictional country that is based on a real place, and also based on real happenings that were going on in the late 1930s during the beginning of World War II. Tintin travels to the Kingdom of Sildavia, and once again this is a story that begins from a very simple point of departure, and it becomes more and more complex as time goes by. And very interesting, King Audiker's Scepter is a book that a lot of the people that criticize Hergé for being collaborationist during World War II definitely have not read King Audiker's Scepter, because this is a book in which Hergé very clearly sides with democracy. He very clearly sets himself very much against any kind of totalitarian regime. The totalitarian regime of Borduria is eschewed, is criticized in favor of the kingdom of Sildavia, and Tintin will end up saving the day and helping keep totalitarianism at bay, which is something that was growing in different parts of Europe at the time. Let's think of Mussolini in Italy, who, by the way, was friends with the priest Norbert Wallet, who kept a picture of Mussolini on his desk at Le 20e siècle, the newspaper. Let's think, of course, of the Nazis and the Third Reich. So when we criticize Hergé for what happened in the intervening years, for the fact that he published Tintin in a newspaper that was controlled by the Nazis during the Nazi occupation of Belgium, we have to think that this could be something that he was doing in order to survive, more than something that was ideologically driven, because once we read King Audiker's Scepter, we can see very clearly that Hergé had nothing to do ideologically with Hitler's Germany. During the war, during World War II, especially after the Nazi occupation of Belgium, Hergé kept publishing Tintin in Le Soir, which was a newspaper that was controlled by the Germans, by the Nazis. And this next book in the series, The Crab with the Golden Claws, which, by the way, was the very first one that I ever read, is an extremely important adventure of Tintin. And we see Tintin there in the Sahara Desert, Tintin again in the Near East, but there's somebody with him. You see, you look at that cover, you will recognize, I'm getting it a little bit closer, you'll recognize Captain Haddock. Captain Haddock will become Tintin's companion. They will be inseparable from now on, but little did Hergé know that this sea captain, who right here in this book is actually quite annoying to Tintin, and actually quite dangerous to Tintin because of his affair with the bottle, because of the fact that he is a heavy drinker and has an alcohol problem, will become inseparable to Tintin, though, from now on, and will become a central part of the Adventures of Tintin. Again, we're dealing with drug smuggling. Again, we are dealing with opium, in this case hidden in cans of crab. But the most interesting thing here, the most important thing here, is the appearance of who will be Tintin's sidekick from now on, Captain Haddock. One of my favorite stories. The plot, again, is interesting. It draws you in, but the personality of Captain Haddock starts showing in this story. And if Hergé didn't realize what he was doing at first, he will very clearly see from now on that Captain Haddock is going to become a cornerstone of the Tintin saga. The next adventure, The Shooting Star, and there you see it, that big mushroom on the cover, is an adventure in which Hergé, at a time of the Nazi occupation of Belgium, Hergé is trying to get away from any political content in his adventures. And so this adventure is basically brought about by science. There's a meteorite that falls in the North Sea, and there are two opposing expeditions, a European one and one from the United States, trying to reach the North Sea, where a new metal has appeared because of the fall of that meteorite. The very beginning of the story is really interesting in that it captures the sense of restlessness, of chaos, of doom that a lot of people in Europe and around the world were feeling because of the outbreak of World War II. And in this case, Hergé was trying to get away from politics as much as possible, but of course he was criticized because all the scientists that were a part of the expedition led by Tintin and Captain Haddock were scientists that came from either neutral countries or countries associated with the Axis at the time of World War II. So even though he was really trying to get away from any political controversy, he still created some in the end. Maybe not as impressive of a story as The Crab with the Golden Claws or some of the previous ones we've seen, like King Audiker's Scepter or The Black Island, but still very interesting, building a lot of suspense, and marking the beginning of a few episodes in the Tintin series where Hergé is trying to get away from political content and trying to explore the idea of a pure adventure, an adventure in this case that has to do with science or pseudoscience in the case of the shooting star. The next one is actually a two-part adventure. Hergé became very fond, especially after this adventure, of two-part adventures, and he would draw a few of those. The first one of which some people think could be Cigars of the Pharaoh and the Blue Lotus, but it's not very clear to me that Hergé originally planned it as a two-part adventure, whereas in the case of The Secret of the Unicorn, which is the first part of this adventure, it is clear that this is a two-part adventure from start to finish. And again, this is Hergé dabbling in the world of a pure adventure, an adventure that would be an escape of sorts from the difficulties brought about by World War II, brought about on himself, but also on his readership. And in this case, we have Captain Haddock, and Captain Haddock is an important part of this story. It has to do with a treasure hunt, a hidden treasure that is related to an ancestor of Captain Haddock from the 17th century or so. The first part of the adventure sets up the actual premise of the adventure, and it's The Secret of the Unicorn, which I showed before. And then the adventure is actually carried out, the actual treasure hunt is carried out in Rackham's treasure, which calls upon Tintin and his friends to travel on a ship and also to try to find the treasure underwater. You can see there's a kind of a submarine that Tintin and Milou are using there to try and find the location of Rackham's treasure. This also brings up the appearance of a new character who will also become extremely important, just as important in some cases as Captain Haddock in some of the later books, and that is Professor Calculus, or Professeur Tournesol in French, a scientist, an inventor. He starts out being sort of an inventor and then becomes a important and noted and celebrated scientist who will help take humans to the moon and help humans set their foot on the moon for the first time. But at this point he's still an inventor, largely based on the real-life Auguste Piccard that Hergé knew, who was a Belgian scientist and inventor as well. But little by little, just like in the case of Captain Haddock, Professor Calculus will become more and more important and will start developing his own personality. With Red Rackham's treasure and the first part of that adventure, The Secret of the Unicorn, Hergé realizes that a two-part adventure gives him the opportunity to create a much more complex adventure with more complicated plot twists. So he enjoys that to such an extent that he will create two more of these two-part adventures, but we will talk about those in the next video, the second part of this brief overview of the complete adventures of Tintin. We reach this way the end of this first part of the video. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez. Mine is the copyright of this video, which was recorded in Jackson, in the state of Tennessee, in the United States of America in July of 2020. You will be able to see this. It will be available very soon on my YouTube channel, Anton GF. And very soon we will have a second part, beginning with the 7 crystal balls and going all the way through Tintin and the Picaros. We might mention Tintin and Al's art, but we will not talk very much in depth about that one. Until then, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate you watching and listening. And so long, everybody.